I mean, the theme of this season is the breakaways are actually making it. This is unheard of. You don't see it, but we've been seeing it a lot this year. So it's obviously the guys that are making these breakaways are stronger. They're more aerodynamic. They're measuring the way they pull at the front, like very strategically and scientifically, and they're actually making it to the finish line.
I think George has missed the elephant in the room, the biggest reason why riders are staying away in the breakaway. Let me first go through the ones he's mentioned. So he said riders are getting stronger. As a whole, yeah, I'd agree. The peloton is getting stronger. The second half of the peloton is stronger now than it was 20, 30 years ago. So yes, but I don't think that necessarily leads to more riders, more success in the breakaway. I think if we change stronger to more specialist, then yes, because we have always had those strong riders, the big engines. They've been in the peloton, guys like even in recent history, Jens Voigt, but we haven't had as many breakaway specialists, I think, as we have now. There are riders now that build their entire cycling careers around getting into the breakaways and being successful in them. So I'd say I would agree in that there are more specialists, but I don't think in and of itself riders getting stronger is leading to more breakaways being successful, because you have strong riders in the breakaway, you also have stronger riders chasing behind. So I think status quo maintained for that one in terms of strength. I don't think that's making breaks more likely. Next one he said was more aerodynamic. Absolutely. The peloton was way more aero than it was even 10 years ago. But I don't think that necessarily leads to more breakaways staying away. Main reason for this is because we know that aerodynamic drag isn't linear. As speed increases, aero drag increases exponentially. So if we look at aerodynamics for the peloton as a whole, the place it has the biggest impact on is when they're going fastest, which, comparing a breakaway to riders riding on the front of the peloton, in the last hour of a stage, the guys riding on the front of the peloton need to go faster than the breakaway because they're catching them. So if we look at just aerodynamics as a whole, in the place that it would be benefiting riders most, it's actually benefiting, in my opinion, the riders riding on the front of the bunch, chasing the breakaway, because that's the point where the speeds are highest. So I think, if anything, aerodynamics is null to helping breakaway stay away. If anything, it's actually helping the peloton chase down the riders in the breakaway in the last hour of a stage when they need to average a higher average speed. Final one George mentioned was more measured pulling of turns. 100% agree that these breakaway specialists now, it's a total science. The way they roll turns, the way they manage the gap to the peloton. There's sort of an art in terms of tricking the peloton into slowing down, letting them dangle out there, then lifting speed, and then using the terrain, pacing up the hills, over crests, down hills, the way they ride the wheels. It is a total art, science that guys are spending their entire cycling career doing. So definitely I agree there, but these don't pale in comparison to what I think is the biggest reason why, and that's fueling, carbohydrate intake. That has changed night and day, black and white, over the last 20 years. The problem's always been, in the past, riders could get very fit, but over long stages and one-day races, riders struggled to match their work rate throughout an entire stage to match their fitness level, because back in the day, sports scientists thought, even fairly recently, that you could only absorb 60 grams of carbs an hour. And an athlete, for example, with a threshold power of 400 watts, needs more than 60 grams of carbs an hour throughout a stage, especially if they're in a breakaway. They will deplete themselves if they're only consuming that much. We obviously now know, if you're watching this video, you probably know that you can absorb, these elite athletes, 100, 110, 120 even, possibly even higher grams of carbs per hour. And that's only something that's come along really, as far as I'm aware, widespread in the peloton in the last 10 years. Now, the reason why I think this benefits the breakaways more so than the riders in the peloton is that when the peloton's chasing a breakaway, essentially breakaway gets a gap, riders just ride tempo on the front of the peloton, which has less fueling demands. Like these very, very metabolically fit riders riding tempo, guys like Tim de Klerk, can ride at 320, 330 watts, burning very little amount of carbs. So the actual tempo riding on the front of the peloton, if you've got three guys rolling through, isn't that fuel intensive. The place where a lot of the damage is done fueling wise for the guys in the front of the bunch is in the last hour of the stage when they ramp it up. You might get 6, 7 guys rolling through. They're burning through a whole heap of carbohydrates, almost 100% fueled by carbohydrates, by glycogen, but because they're only doing that for the last hour of the stage, it's less crucial that they nail that upper carbohydrate limit throughout the entire stage. You can in a sense get away with a bit lower fueling because you're only going hard, those last riders rolling through, for the last hour, if that makes sense. Breakaway, not the case. The breakaway is essentially almost trying to even pace their breakaway effort across, let's say, a 4-hour stage, relatively evenly across the 4 hours. They don't want to go out and do the first hour at 50k an hour, and then the last hour they're struggling to do 43. They want to pace it fairly evenly. Back in the day, even if you had fit riders, 4 hours in, back when they were only eating 50, 60 grams an hour, they'd be hitting the wall, and then the speeds always drop in the last hour. These days, you've got really fit riders, these huge engines, and they're in the breakaway, and their output barely drops across the whole stage. You could have a rider with an FTP of 400 watts, and they're doing 360 norm for 4 hours. Steady baseline. And that is only possible if you're hitting those upper level carbohydrate intakes per hour, which they're only doing recently. And I think that's why these breakaways, even if it's 3 or 4 guys, are very hard to chase down because they're not slowing down in the last hour. They keep going the same speed because they can fuel it. And 20 years ago, they weren't able to fuel it that well because a lot of riders didn't know you could take that much fuel in and utilize it. That's my thoughts on it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.